Hello everyone and welcome to the Hidden Lives of Writers. I'm Fiona Snyckers and I'm joined by Gail Schimmel.
Hello Fiona.
Hi Gail, how's your writing week been?
I'm worried that what I'm going to tell you is something that I tell you quite a lot, but I'm going to talk a little bit about editing because what I've been doing this week is editing one of the Katie Gales. Mm-hmm. And it's always a nice reminder, the process of editing, which is like peeling an onion. So when you get your edit notes back, as you know, we get for Katie Gale, we get a letter that highlights the structural problems and the plot problems and particular themes we must maybe pick up on a bit more. So it's got an overview. And then we also get the manuscript back that is marked up with changes. It can be a small change, a line change, and it can be can I have a bit more description here, that kind of thing. And now you've got to work through all those things together. And I, at the moment, I'm in a very nice rhythm that I've read through the overarching things and I know what they are. And I'm now going chapter by chapter. And the way I'm doing it for technical reasons is I first accept all her line changes in that chapter. Mm-hmm. And then I go and I check for comments in that chapter and I work through the comments in that chapter. And then I know that when I finish this process, I'm going to have to go back to that original letter and check that in doing this, I've done all the things, or do I need to go and fix? And I know there's one particular overarching thing I'm going to have to go back and fetch. And it's a, on one hand, frustrating process. It's small and it's detailed and it's commas and it's, painstaking. And on the other hand, a very satisfying process because you can tick things off. And Fiona, I love a list that I can tick. And this I can tick, done that, done that, done that. And when it's over, it's over. And hopefully, oh no, we're recording on a Friday. By the end of this week, it will not be over. Maybe if I work this weekend, by the end of this week, it will be over. How about you? What have you been up to?
I am walking around on a daily basis thinking about how to fix the last 20,000 words of my manuscript. And as I'm going about my day, these ideas are coming to me, these images, these ideas, bits of dialogue or just certain sentences that I want to add. And they're all so brilliant and so perfect that I feel genuinely confident that I'll remember them because they're so good. I mean, how could I possibly forget this brilliant insight? And with that confidence, I don't make a note of it. And when I come to sit down at my laptop and channel the genius onto the screen, it's all gone. So, and
all
sometimes
gone. Not even the inkling of the idea.
Not even a flicker of what genius I was thinking about sort of 5 hours earlier. So I've got to, I mean, sometimes I'm driving, sometimes I'm walking, but I've always got a phone with me. I think I need to have some sort of voice app open, something that I can just try to capture, hopefully in not too obscure a way, these thoughts that are in my mind, because some of them, I know they're not actually genius, but some of them are a little bit useful and could be applicable to what I'm doing. And I really just need to make note of them and capture these butterflies that are flitting past.
Could you not voice note them to someone? Because that's normally...
Yes, that's
yourself.
A good idea.
If you feel like voice noting to me, just at the beginning, say no need to listen to this.
Yes.
And then if I need to send it back to you, because I don't know if you can listen back to your own voice note.
I think you can.
I think you can. If you need to voice note me, please feel free. But do tell me at the beginning what you're doing so that I don't listen mystified by why I'm in a different world, because I will have forgotten that we had this conversation.
We are a study in menopause, both of us. Gail, what have you been reading or watching or listening to lately?
I'm a little bit embarrassed. I needed a TV fix after Younger, and I was telling someone at a work function about it, and he said him and his wife have just watched all 88 episodes of Everwood.
Wow, okay.
And I thought, 88 episodes, that sounds like something I could get into because I need to get into something and then not have to choose another thing for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And I started watching Everwood, and now Everwood is very all-American. It's about a doctor who is a famous and skilled neurosurgeon, capable of amazing things, but his wife dies. And now he is heartbroken with a capital H, and his wife has said to him that if she ever dies, he must go to a place where her train once broke down when she was a child, and this place is Everwood. And that's where she will be waiting for him.
Okay.
Yeah. So he packs up his 2 children, and they go off to Everwood, where he is now a small town doctor. And the children have difficulties and are bullied, and lots of very tropey, all-American, with a little underpinning of religion, which I'm not that into, so it's surprising that I'm blasting through it. So it's been interesting, but there's something riveting about it. There's something old time. My husband has described it as like Little House on the Prairie and Goodnight John Boy, and there's that element, but there's something that's keeping me watching. Last night's episode, they had a bit of a go at ADHD medication. And as a parent who ADHD medication has saved my life, I did not like the message that came out of that show. But I'm so near the end of season 1 that I will get to the end of season 1 before deciding if I'm going to judge it completely for bad-mouthing Ritalin. And frankly, the child in the program needs to be on Ritalin. Anyway, that's my rant about Ritalin. So that's what I'm up to. What about you? Please tell me it's something a little bit more intellectual than me.
It is, but we do not disparage. We don't look down on anyone for...
What's that TikTok thing? We
listen and we don't judge.
And we don't judge.
That's it, yes. So I have just finished reading a book called Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner. It's not a very recent book. I think it came out in about 2024, but for some mysterious publishing-y reason, it is on the Dublin long list now, sort of 2 years after publication. Interesting. And it was such an odd and challenging book because it's about, and it's written in the first person by a woman who is spying on environmental activists. Not because she is ideologically opposed to them. She doesn't really care about their cause or about, her employer's cause or anything. She's just doing it because she's good at it and because she gets paid to do it. And she embeds herself in this environmental movement. She develops personal relationships with them, even to the point of sleeping with some of them. She develops friendships, and she has a very observant eye for all the quirks and the failings of these sort of leftist movements, which I believe is a particular interest of Rachel Kushner's. And I'm wondering if she's a kind of sociopath figure, because
the author or the character?
The character, let's be very clear. Because she just is conscienceless. These people are not real to her. She says that several times. You're not real to me. She says it in her head, not out loud. But it's such a strange thing because I'm totally trapped in her head. There is no other perspective. You can't get out of her sociopathic brain, or that's what I think it is. And it's very compelling, very interesting, pretty long. And I'm interested to see if it'll actually get onto the shortlist. I think it was shortlisted for a Booker at some point in its journey. Fascinating book. And if anyone else has read it, I'd love to hear about that.
Because I'm going to be honest, based on that, I'm not about to start reading it. I'll stick with my Everwood.
And I might start Everwood. It sounds rather good. So someone else who writes incredibly fascinating books is our guest today. Our guest today is Damon Galgut. Damon wrote his first book at the age of 17, and it was published as A Sinless Season. He is also the author of, to name but a few, In a Strange Room, 2010, Arctic Summer, 2014, The Promise, 2021, and I must mention The Good Doctor from 2003, as well as numerous other novels and short stories. Damon was shortlisted for the Booker Prize 3 times and won it in 2021 for The Promise. Damon, we are so pleased, honored, and excited that you are talking to us today. Hello and welcome.
Hi, I'm very pleased to be chatting to you.
I have to say, Damon, you're one of those authors that when we wrote you on our wish list, we were like, are we actually brave enough to even ask for this wish, like one of those out there wishes? So we are very, very excited. But we're going to treat you like an ordinary mortal writer and start by asking you, how has your writing week been?
It's been actually a pretty difficult writing week for me. So yeah, it's a question that hits a pretty tender spot at this very moment.
You've got to give us more than that. What's gone wrong? What does a bad writing week mean for you?
Well, I'm trying to get going with something new, which is the very worst part of the process for me. It takes me forever. I'm very slow. I feel incredibly stupid at this point in the process. And really, for me, the whole first draft of a novel is a terrible slog. But the sloggiest part of the slog is the very initial stages where I actually don't know what it is I want to do. So I feel a little bit as if I'm wading through a swamp trying to find a solid object to pick up. So, I'm filling up pages, but not very competently or satisfyingly. Certainly it's not been very satisfying to me. And this process will continue until I find something that I guess that I feel engaged enough by and interested enough in to live with for the 3 or sometimes 4 years it can take to write a book. So, yeah, this is the very, very worst moment of all of that. That's why it's been an especially difficult week.
So back in 2021, when The Promise was being listed for awards and winning the Booker, and everyone was asking you what's next, you mentioned a possible collection of short stories centered around people who were away from home. Where has that gone, if you can tell us? And is this thing that you're wrestling with now that or something else?
No, that project is not gone or shelved by any means, but I got myself into a position when I sold The Promise to my British publisher. I did a 2-book deal, which is not something I would rush to do again. And the second proposed book was a collection of short stories. So I suddenly found myself in the middle of a publicity maelstrom with a contractual obligation at the same time that I certainly was not able to fulfill within the time period that I'd agreed to. And I chatted to the publishers who were very accommodating and said that perhaps it would be a better idea in any case if I followed up with a novel. So the short stories are still there. They're in the background, but they're not my primary focus at this point. I'm trying to find a new novel to keep me occupied. But stories are always good as a diversion along the way.
I'm afraid I'm not going to let you move off your bad writing week yet because I am fascinated by it. Because most writers we talk to find the beginning of the book the easiest part and the most exciting part. So I'm fascinated that it's bad for you. And I want to know, if you don't know yet what it is you're writing about and you have to write to explore it, what do you sit down and write? Because most of us, we sit down and write with that key of the idea. How does that process work and how do you know when you found it?
I guess, when I was younger, the process was a bit different. In my earlier years, I think I used to embark on a book with a much stronger idea of where I was going. In other words, I needed a more or less fully formed idea before I could embark. That's not so much the case anymore. I get ideas all the time. I think most writers are always keeping their ear open for a good story. But a lot of those ideas are not the right fit for me, in the sense that I'm not a workman-like author, I guess. I know how stories work. I know how genres work, but I have to be personally engaged and excited by the themes of a piece before I can really pour the necessary part of my spirit into the project. So these early stages are really testing out ideas. I have notebooks full of projects that have begun and not really gone anywhere, which is a very dispiriting process to go through, I should add, because it always feels like a failure. What makes a particular idea catch fire? It's hard to know that, but I think it's when an idea or the themes contained in an idea align with whatever it is that might be preoccupying you internally at that point, which might account for why, writing came more easily or more fluently to me when I was younger. I think I was much more excited by plot, by story, than I am these days. These days, I'm, I think, far more interested in the more elaborate games that structure can provide. So if I can take an example, what excited me about The Promise was not necessarily, the events that I was writing about. It's a novel that doesn't really hinge on plot per se. What excited me was the possibility of the possibilities opened up by the structure of the book. In other words, the fact that it's divided into 4 pieces, each one focused on a separate moment in a decade of South African history. So there is, part of my background is in theater, and there's something theatrical about that structure that excites the aesthetic sensibility in me. But at the same time, thematically, at this point in my life, I'm looking back on numerous decades, and I have a kind of internal appreciation of how my life has changed over the last 60 years in South Africa. Also, how the life of this country has changed. And the structure allowed me to throw those changes into quite sharp relief. Now, that was exciting to me, far more exciting than, a racy, event-based plot. Not that I dislike that sort of novel, not at all. I can be very absorbed by it in reading, less so maybe in writing these days.
You mentioned in previous interviews that you try to stay away from reading anything that was written by a very strong stylist because it kind of gets in your head and affects the way you write. Do you have a strong chameleon in yourself that sort of causes you to start unconsciously imitating? And are you still that way, that you avoid reading too much while you are writing?
It's a good question. I'm far less thrown now by the strong styles of authors. But in my early years, I could be very thrown by a stylist like William Faulkner, for example, whose voice is so powerful and distinctive that, it throws up echoes in my own head because I guess I'm excited by language and how people use it. We all are. I mean, it's part of what's thrilling about reading and writing. I could feel my own voice being knocked off track a lot of the time. I don't think it's that uncommon. I work with students a bit, and I encourage them, actually, if they're starting out, to try and find their own voice by echoing the voices of writers they really admire. The reason we respond to particular writers, I think, is because there's something in the style that resonates with yourself, your own sensibility. And writing feeds off other writing. I really don't think it's a crime to be inspired by someone else's style. It's a crime to steal someone else's more concrete ideas, but style is an abstraction. And, language is something we have in common. The way we use it to some degree, we also have in common. So if your instinctive leaning is towards Faulkner, then explore the Faulkner in yourself and imitate first before you make it your own, I think.
Another thing that we were both fascinated by reading previous interviews, and you've sort of touched on it now, you refer to your notebooks. And we read very specific in several interviews that you prefer to write by hand, and I'm reading my notes, using a tortoiseshell Parker pen. We are very, very interested in this. Can you tell us about that and tell us if that is still the case, and also when it was, or if it still is? At what point does the Parker pen notebook writing become a digital exercise for you, if ever?
Yeah, I still use my notebooks and my Parker pen. It was given to me as a gift by somebody when I was 21, I think, or 22, and it's still functioning. There's a plug for Parker pens, but I really love my pen. Yeah, there's something about the slowed down rhythm of writing old style on a page that allows me to consider the thoughts I'm putting down just for a few extra seconds. And it also, in a very tactile way, makes me feel connected to the page and to the words on the page. There's, for me, a disconnect if I'm tapping buttons on a keyboard and words are appearing on a screen. I don't necessarily feel viscerally to those words. Visceral connection helps me. That said, I've written one novel straight onto computer after trying my longhand method, and that was Arctic Summer. I think there was just too much dense historical information for me to be able to assimilate it with my usual methods. At least the computer allowed me to move stuff around in a more efficient way, but it's not a way of working that I really fell in love with.
And on the subject of your Luddite tendencies, we also read that you are basically unplugged from the digital world, to the extent that at one stage you said you don't even have a television. Television is not part of your life. Why? What does that give you? Is that still something you do? What are the benefits of being entirely analog in your life?
I'm afraid I can't claim any longer to be entirely analog. No, I'm not quite as much of a Luddite as I used to be. There was a time I didn't even own a motor car. The reasons were probably more financial than, principled. I don't have a TV simply because most television doesn't interest me that much. But on the other hand, I really do love movies, so I have a screen that I can play DVDs on. Even which was quite a principled point for me. I didn't have a mobile phone until a couple of years ago. It's partly the booger, because there was so much travel and communication involved that I just couldn't make it work without a phone. And I thought it was a temporary measure, but it turned out to be as addictive for me as it is for everyone else. And that's a very good reason to avoid, the mobile phone. But it's also very, very difficult, close to impossible, in fact, to function in the world the way it is now without it. So, yeah, I don't have a kind of articulated, worked out position on these things. I have more of an instinctive reaction to technology, I guess. Most of it's bewildering to me, but then, of course, some of it's very helpful. On that note, because I don't think I answered your earlier question, I will only switch to working on the computer most of the time once I have at least 2 handwritten drafts down. So the computer becomes a very useful tool for me at that point, because, in that final 2 drafts, however many one is going to do, you're down to a much more granular level than the way in. As you narrow down on the conclusion of the writing process, it becomes much more, as I say, granular. You're working sentence by sentence. Should this comma be in this place? should this phrase be here, or could I perhaps move it to this spot? And those sorts of tiny adjustments are well served by, the computer. Not so much, as I say, the broad brushstrokes of the earlier process or earlier part of the process. So, yeah, I'm not throwing technology out the window. I suppose, old-fashioned in the sense that I like to. Part of what has always appealed to me about writing is that you can do it all by yourself in a room with very little, a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper, essentially. It's part of what I've always found thrilling. And I still respond to the simplicity of that work process. So I don't really want to turn it into something slick and, I want to say easy, but writing's never easy. But I'm not after simplifying the process. I'm after doing whatever makes it work best.
Damon, we often ask writers if they were the kind of child who wrote stories from when they were children, when they started wanting to be a writer, why they started wanting to be a writer. You published your first book at 17, so I think it goes without saying that you knew quite early that you were a writer and that you needed to write. But can you tell us a little bit about that early childhood, that little Damon, and why it was that writing was such a compelling force for you?
It's a hard question to answer because, right, very to spend your time. Nobody will die of malnourishment if they don't have books. They may lead a more impoverished life, but are a sensual indulgence and maybe a spiritual guide of some sort, but they're not essential, and writers are not performing an essential task in that sense. So why does anyone get drawn to this? I mean, I remember as a little boy learning to read, and there was a moment I still think of as magical, where I was following the words on the page, and as you do when you're very small, you speak them aloud. And I remember my voice going softer and softer until I stopped speaking, and yet the voice continued in my head. And I was so excited by what felt to me like this primitive, extraordinary alchemy that I ran to my mother to tell her, Mommy, I'm reading in my head. And she kind of just shrugged at me and she said, yes, that's what you do. But it was an absolute revelation to me that these printed words on the page could become a kind of music in my own brain. And some of that amazement still fuels me. I'm still excited by the very, the basic magic of that transfer that happens. That said, I guess everyone has their own process, and I've talked about this in other interviews, and I really should preface this by saying that I don't know that this is the case, but I suspect that my own fascination with writing developed while I was very ill as a child in hospital, and a lot of relatives, most of all my parents, used to come and read to me, and that became a way of connecting with the world, and also a way of escaping the dreary situation of a hospital room. And I believe that my love of words and books and stories came out of being read to, maybe out of being read to, in critical circumstances. But as I say, I don't know that for sure. There are lots of people who are just as driven as I am to do this, and they didn't spend any time in hospital as a child. So I really don't know. But I think there is a strong psychological component in me that associates books and writing with survival and, life. And it's not a connection I want to question too much. But yeah, there's something in me that feels, I don't have the right term for it, but almost existentially connected to the act of writing. And I always feel when I'm coming to the end of writing a book that I'm going to die. I'll die when this book is finished, or, the great fear, I'll die before the book is finished. But the fear of death is quite strongly connected to the fear of, ending a writing process. And it's something that's happened enough times for me to recognize it now.
That's so interesting. Yeah. We've spoken to a number of writers who say that they feel as though as long as they have a book on the go, they won't die. They know they won't die before they finish this book. So having a book on the go is a way to keep themselves alive. But I share that thing with you that I'm worried about dying before this book is finished. Imagine having an unfinished book, that you never got to finish. But let's talk about that experience of being published at the age of 17. Did you know how unusual it was? Were you surprised? And what does a 17-year-old bring to the page? Is it an energy, a freshness, a youth perspective? What is it?
I'd actually written a couple of novels before that first published book. I started my first one, I think, in primary school still. They were pretty terrible books, I should add. A sort of a mashed up amalgam of, Wilbur Smith and the Lord of the Rings, or something equally confused. That third novel, which ended up being published, I was very close to a particular teacher in my high school, and I showed it to her, and she sent it off to Jonathan Ball Publishers in Johannesburg, and it got picked up there, to my, astonishment, but obviously also to my great excitement. All I'd ever wanted was to see my name on a book cover. So yeah, it was not something I took lightly or casually. But I will say that I think being published at such a young age was not necessarily helpful to me. The book, it may have some positive attributes, but it's a book that makes me deeply embarrassed now, probably in the way that, most of us would feel embarrassed by our youthful, creative efforts, poetry or stories or whatever it may be. It's quite overwrought and purple in patches, and I've not allowed any publishers to reissue that book for some years now. I wish retrospectively that I had kicked off with my second book, Small Circle of Beings, which is, to be sure, in many ways also a young book, but it just feels to me still, despite its shortcomings, as a more solid and soundly oriented piece of work than the first one. We all have to learn to write, and maybe I was still learning too much or whatever it may be, but I feel uncomfortable if I look at a copy of us in this season. I was going to say something which has probably slipped my mind now. Yeah, I think part of what I struggled with was that it gave me the very false impression, being published at the age of 18 or 19, it gave me the very false impression that this was a lot easier than it actually is. The book got quite a lot of attention that was largely focused on my age rather than its qualities. As I became less of a feature, and I was being more on my ability. But of course, older, writing became a far more difficult process after that. So it may have served me better if I had struggled in those early years in the way that most of us do, rather than, as I say, getting this fake impression that this is something I had at my fingertips and could repeat and repeat and repeat, because it was not the case. I had a couple of novels after that were failures, that were rejected, and that was difficult after, what felt like an early success. So yeah, lots of illusions in that process, but illusions are there to be stripped away, and I guess all writers have to go through that one way or the other. This just happened to be my way.
And it's not the only case of extraordinary success you've had. So you had that early extraordinary success, and then a Booker Prize win, which is, I'm interested in how it felt having won the Booker Prize, which is the most extraordinary thing to have done. How do you approach the page after that? How do you start writing the next book after a win like that? Is it a similar, like, oh my God, I've reached this extraordinary high? How do I even what's the next step?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've been asked that, and I honestly don't think that on any conscious level, I feel dread of being judged in that way after the Booker. I mean, I'm not sitting here writing these pages and thinking, oh my God, is this Booker worthy? Am I making a fool of myself? And I think, it may be an unconscious factor. Let me at least concede that. Perhaps on some unconscious level that is a doubt and a fear. But I think what stands me in good stead, if I can put it like that, is an enormous amount of self-doubt. So pervasive that, in fact, even winning the Booker was immune, to my self-questioning, in the sense that I found writing unbelievably difficult. I have always felt on the edge of failure, and I have always wondered whether this is something that I can pull off again. So I don't know that those things are going to be more intense this time around. They've always been pretty intense. But perhaps you should ask me that a little bit further down the line, because probably those kinds of questions would arise more as you're reaching the end of a new book. For me, it's only the thought of imminent publication that really brings fear to the table. It's only then that it becomes real, and you start to think, oh my God, other people are going to be reading these sentences, and what will, my mother or Fiona or whoever think of this. But I tend not to be plagued by those kinds of qualms early on. I think because I'm just overwhelmed by my own personal qualms, which is, what's spinning this week. Just feeling like I'm never going to make this work again. But I don't think I can blame the Booker.
I wanted to talk about narrative perspective for a moment. I saw that you once said that working on a film script gave you the idea of experimenting with narrative perspective in the promise. You slip between third person and first person perspective. But then I noticed that you were at least experimenting with that in A Strange Room, and possibly in The Good Doctor as well. Is that something that's always interested you, and will you experiment with that in the future?
Yeah, that's quite a big question. It's true that in A Strange Room, I discovered, if you like, or made use of a narrative device that switched between first and third person, sometimes inside the same sentence. Mm. And that I carried that, or found a way, I think, to carry it a little bit further with the prompts. But I should also add that the cinematic aspect of The Promise was a slightly different one. I had been working on a film script. I started working on The Promise. I broke away from it at a certain point to work on this film script. I returned to the book, and some of the logic of the film script process carried over to the novel. So what I would regard as the cinematic aspects of The Promise are not those necessarily those small shifts in perspective inside a sentence. It's for a larger narrative. It changes perspective from place to place, from situation to situation, person to person, in the same way that the illusion is created if we watch a movie that we're watching something continuous instead of something that's built up out of, little bits and pieces. It was one of the things that excited me a lot in the writing of that book. I'm very easily bored these days by things I've done over and over. So as I say, I don't want to, bore everyone by repeating myself, but plot excites me a lot less than these kinds of, I don't want to call them games and make it sound flippant, because it's something I actually take seriously, but, one can play in a serious way. So it's these aspects of writing where one is actually playing, experimenting, trying to push the form a little bit that excite me the most. So yeah, I'm of course very open to trying to push it a little further. Not so interested in repeating what I've done before, but if I can find a way to make it work slightly differently or, take it into an area that I haven't yet, that would be quite stimulating and an interesting challenge to try to rise to. So sorry, it's quite a general answer, but it's about all I can give you right now.
I will ease your burden with asking a very specific question. One of the thing you and I share is a fascination for Roald Dahl short stories. And from what I've read, you were particularly inspired by the short story, it's called Pig, I think, which is not one I remember, interestingly, even though I'm obsessed with that collection. Tell me what it is about Roald Dahl's writing that was so inspirational that you have quoted it in several interviews as a source of inspiration.
You asked me earlier about, what gave rise initially to the desire to write. Part of it was a very, very influential English teacher I had in primary school, a really extraordinary person who, most of us remember creative writing in primary school or high school as a not very thrilling class session to look forward to. This particular teacher changed that in lots of ways. The kinds of essay topics he used to set us, for example, were absolutely off the wall and not what one would expect or be used to in the normal curriculum. And I was just ready for that. Anyway, one of the things that he used to do was to read Roald Dahl stories to us. And I'm not talking about the children's stories. I'm talking about those really quite dark, twisted adult stories. And I'm also talking about when I was in what used to be called Standard 4. I don't know what that is in, modern day terminology. But yeah, I was young. And some of the parents complained that he was reading these stories to us, and he was told he wasn't allowed to do it anymore. And I understand where that comes from, because the stories were disturbing. But it was precisely that quality that I found most thrilling. It was the first time I'd realized that writing didn't have to be entertaining and comforting. I mean, it can be those things, but it also has the potential to absolutely upend your world and make you question everything that seemed familiar. And that story in particular did that to me. I think it struck a particular spark because it's about a terrible thing that happens to a young vegetarian boy. And I happen to be a young vegetarian boy, and I identified very strongly with that main character and, of course, with what happened to him. It's a very dark story indeed. I've reread it several times since. Of course, it doesn't have quite the same power now, but it really was the first time where writing felt potentially explosive to me, and I was thrilled by that. It felt like something that I could use, I guess, to shock, startle, upset people rather than kind of stroke them and make them feel all was well with the world. Truly, I think if books had remained for me something that was merely a diversion or an entertainment, I would have lost interest. It's because I think they do have the potential to make us see the world anew and see what kind of a situation we've created for ourselves and the sorts of lies that we've created to make that situation work. That really kind of thrilled me. I started out earlier by saying that perhaps books are not essential or necessary. If they can justify their presence in the world, I think it's on their ability to shock and startle us into seeing the world differently. I mean, if books are powerful, it's because they can help us to change things, I guess, and make us want to change things. So yeah, that's always been quite a strong impetus in writing for me. I don't want to comfort people, and I'm always kind of secretly pleased when someone comes up to me and says, usually accusingly, I find your books really disturbing. And yeah, that makes me happy. That's what I think books should be doing.
Yeah, let's talk some more about this startling capacity of books, particularly Arctic Summer, which it's my personal favorite of the 4 of your books that I've read. I came across a review online of that book written by a man who knew Forster, E.M. Forster. And he had had several sessions of sitting in Forster's study, sipping whiskey and chatting to him and getting to know him. And he said in his review that after reading your book, he felt as though he finally knew E.M. Forster through this imaginative retelling of Forster's life that you had undertaken. And I am so fascinated by the capacity of biographical fiction to do something that straight biography cannot do. It's some kind of certain kind of truth that can only be conveyed through a fictional reimagining of fact. Can you speak to us about that? Is that something that interests you, and is it something you might go back to in the future?
Yeah, what brought me to write Arctic Summer? Well, there's a bunch of factors, but really what interested me at that point was to look at what goes into the writing of a novel. And that book is looking at the specific years that took E.M. Forster to write to India. A period that was stalled for 9 years because he was blocked personally, could solution to a very basic problem in the book. And all of that was fascinating to me too, because I spent a lot of time being blocked and trying to find solutions to unblock myself. All writers do at some point or other, but some struggle with it more than others. And clearly it was a big issue for Forster with that particular book. So I was less impelled by the personality of Forster than I was by the process that he went through. But of course, you can't arrive at that process without looking at the person and who he was and where he was and what was going on. Yeah, I spent a few years absolutely steeped in the world of Forster, his letters, his diaries. I went to archives in the UK. I read, I think, every word he'd written. And of course, a very strong sense of his persona emerges from that. And I'm very gratified to hear that some of that may have carried over to the page, because what I felt in the writing process was that I was gesturing towards it rather than ever being able to grasp it. I mean, it's in the nature of a project like that I think you will never arrive at some final definitive reality. You will all be grasping. But yeah, I hope I grasped into to give other people some sense of that. As I say, I have a kind of aversion to repeating my own process or obsession. I mean, we all do it to some degree, but I'm not looking specifically for an historical figure to evoke on the page. If somebody or somebody's life or some aspect of somebody's life struck a spark in the same way, that happened to reflect something that I was obsessed with at the time, yeah, I would see no reason not to do a kind of biographical novel again. The history was torture, quite honestly. It, as I say, I had to drop my tried and trusted working methods in favor of the computer, just because there was so much information to make sense of. So that's a daunting factor, but it's, that's neither here nor there. Every project has its particular challenges, and that was the challenge of that project. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm glad you liked the book. Thank you.
I'm so interested in that the last thing you've said there, because as you were speaking, I was thinking, well, maybe for a writer like you who finds the beginning part hard, maybe all that research was just a blessed relief and a way to get into the book. But you say it wasn't. You say it was torture. Did you? We've spoken to writers who love the research process and actually use it as a procrastination and eventually have to force themselves to stop because they're so happy just wandering through archives, reading things. Was it just a total negative for you?
No. I don't want to give that impression at all. You're absolutely right that working on the book about Forster, I didn't have to fumble around for a narrative arc, because Forster's life provided that to me. So, that was a relief. This floundering around in the mud that I'm doing at the moment was not part of the process. On the other hand, it does bind you into being historically accurate, if that's the sort of book that you want to be writing. So, you choose this route, and some things are going to be simpler, but it's going to throw up a bunch of other problems. And I mean, this is not unique to that particular book. It's just kind of thrown up quite starkly by the fact that it is an historical biography to some extent. But whatever project you set yourself, there are certain aspects of it that are going to come more easily, and others that are going to be a challenge according to your personality and the particular, literary aims that you might have with that book. So, that's as close as I can get to answering your question. For most novelists, creating the plot or the events that are the substance of your book is very much part of the process. Those events tend to embody whatever the themes are that you are working towards, or that you're developing. As I say, sometimes with a book like the Forster one, life has provided the themes in a certain sense. Normally, it involves quite a lot of writing before those themes even become apparent. There's always a sort of moment in the writing of a book where a light switches on and I realize, that's why this idea was attractive to me, because there's an underlying unspoken issue of some sort, which is important to me, that I suddenly realized that is what I've been trying to figure out. You know, it's something that's been said elsewhere about the writing of novels, but there is a level on which you write the book in order to find out why you wanted to write this particular book.
I'm going to sound like Gail now, but I'm very interested in what that floundering around in the mud looks like when you are filling pages, as you say, when you're filling pages of the notebook. What are you writing down? Is it snippets of dialogue? You're not a plot-driven person. It's not probably plot points. Are you experimenting with theme, with character? What is actually going on the page in those moments before the light bulb has gone on?
For me, the biggest difficulty in the writing of a book is finding the voice of that book. I'm not speaking specifically about whether it's written in the first person or the third person, although that is, a decision one has to make. I'm talking about a much broader set of questions, I guess. What is the voice in which this book wants to speak? What kind of language? What range of language? What tone? What's your way into the story? What's the attitude of, the author has an attitude which is usually separate to the attitude of the characters. So, yeah, the writing's about that. But of course, you have to be very concrete. So, as I say, I get ideas all the time and I try to explore the ideas. So, I might try it written from the perspective of a particular character. For example, with A Good Doctor, I started out trying to write it, it's a first-person narrative. I started out trying to write it from the perspective of the other main character in the book called Lawrence, and found it frustrating for a number of reasons, and then decided that the voice of the current narrator, Frank, was a far better platform from which to speak. But I could only do that by, sliding around on the page and trying it this way and that. And I make it sound like a very rational process, perhaps, but it isn't. It's quite instinctual. So something essentially feels right or feels wrong, and I may not really rationally understand why it's right or wrong at that point, but I've learned to go with my feelings. If it feels right, at some point I will understand why this feels right, as opposed to the other routes I could have gone. And that's a different sort of light bulb to the larger one of understanding why the book overall drew you. But there are, there's a sense in which writing a novel is like solving a series of problems. You start with the big problems. What is my story? What do I want to say? Who is involved in the telling of the story? Who do I have to include? Who do I leave out? And as I say, you narrow down through that process to the much more bitty sentence level problems of should this phrase be here? Do I need to say this? Haven't I said this already? The pleasurable, the enjoyable, pleasurable part of the writing process for me happens towards the end. The early process is torture, but towards the end, where everything has been mapped out, laid out, you feel far more secure in the structures you've decided on. Those final decisions, which are really the garnishings or the refurbishment decorations, that you're fitting on at the end, those are pleasurable decisions, because the uncertainties, the doubts have all been dealt with. But you've got to go through an enormous amount of toil before you reach the point of the pleasure. At least I do. I know this process is very different for everybody. Some people only begin writing when they're very, very clear about what they want to set down. Everything is worked out in advance. I've never been that kind of person. I guess I can only really bring it into crisp focus by trying it. and trying means failing a lot of the time. So the writing process for me feels like you're awash in failure until those necessary moments where you realize, yes, that was a good choice. This is working. I'm getting a bit of traction. This is taking shape. And then gradually from the mud, something more solid does begin to emerge. But it's a very long and sometimes very painful process.
Damon, I have to say I'm extremely relieved that some part of the process does give you pleasure, because I've been starting to worry about whether you've made the right life choices. But I'm interested in, when you say it's at the end, do you mean as you get to the end of the writing of the book, first draft, or do you mean the process of editing and editing yourself? I'm interested how you feel about editing in this question, editing yourself and being edited by another person. Which of those, the ending of the first draft, the editing and the being edited by another person, how do you feel about those? Where does the joy lie for you?
Yeah, first draft is joy free. I really, really don't like first drafts at all. And if I look at them, which you can do if you have them, messily written by hand in a notebook, I can see how bad they are and how lost I am a lot of the time. So you go through all that for the first draft, but you also go on faith, and the faith is the knowledge that you can return to this as many times as you need to in order to improve it. And the good news is that successive drafts do improve it. That's assuming, there's enough substance to your first draft to work with. But I would not be able to complete even a first draft without some, solid sense that I know at least a bit of what it is that I'm trying to do. No, I usually, it's hard to count drafts in a sense, because I obsessively rewrite as I go along, even by hand. So what I call a first draft might have been written already 3 times along the way. Sometimes you're lucky and a passage or a few pages come out almost perfectly, but it's very seldom like that. Usually you revisit, you cut, you move stuff around, all of that, and it gradually, starts to feel cleaner, sharper, like something vaguely intelligent. But the real pleasure, the pleasurable process that I've referred to, generally comes in your last draft, which can be, draft 4, sometimes even draft 5. And that's where all the hard slog is done. And you're really tinkering with words, which is a very enjoyable thing to do, at least for me. Being edited by someone else, that's complicated. I do think it's important that at some point you get challenged externally. One of the advantages of this laborious writing and rewriting that I'm describing to you is that by the time you do arrive at your final draft, you can justify every decision you've made because you've been through so much self-doubt. Should this be here? Am I doing the right thing? Is this any good? All of that stuff. That by the time you've got to your final draft, if somebody says to me, I don't know why you've made this decision, I can at least answer them. I can tell them I've done it for this reason or that reason and so on. So if you have a good enough editor, and I've been blessed enough to have a couple along the way, somebody is going to challenge you with the right questions. At that point, I'm generally so in tune or so involved rather with my own book that I know when somebody's put their finger on something that I have a qualm about or a doubt about. Those are the most useful editorial challenges to have, because clearly somebody else has the same worries that you do, and that's a very useful conversation to have. But I do think it's a danger a lot of writers fall into, that they're too open maybe to input from outside, too early. you can be at least I can. Some people may be more solid than I am, but I'm very easily thrown by, people not enthusing, or not liking or not seeing something I'm doing, in the way that I'm seeing it. So if you show somebody a work in progress early on, you can be thrown off course completely by their response if it's not sensitively in tune with the process you're going through. By the end of the writing process, I feel much hardier, and as I say, I'm able to defend the work on a sentence by sentence level and to justify the decisions that I've taken. So the editing at that point can become really enjoyable. But the best editors I've had, I should also throw this in, are also people who are prepared to say, we don't actually want to mess with this. We think it works very well. A lot of insecure editors feel they need to justify their presence in the process by putting you through something, whether, it's needed or not. And that can be very unhelpful, I think. But I've got to a point, I think, where I have a few people in my life whose judgment I trust, and that matters. That's really important. But I hesitate to show the work to anyone before it's reached a particular stage of development, because the wrong word can kill it, essentially.
Mm.
So, Damon, we always like to ask our guests what they have been reading or listening to or watching lately that's made an impression on them.
I have very recently completed a new biography of James Baldwin, the American writer. It's by somebody called Nicholas Boggs, a very, very good biography. Huge, I should add, absolute doorstopper of a book, but it's a fascinating story, and he's obviously a very significant figure. Biographies are interesting because I recently read a new biography of Sam Shepard, who's another figure I find fascinating, and it was not a great biography. It's hard to put your finger on why one biography as opposed to another is more satisfying. It's partly about the information that's being provided, but it can also be a matter of interpretation, whether you feel that the author of the biography is, understanding and representing the events and concerns of the person concerned accurately and sympathetically. So the Baldwin biography was deeply sympathetic and highly analytical in a way that made me feel, I was being brought a little closer to the persona of this particular writer. Whereas with the Shepard biography, I felt I was being given the events of the life, but the interpretation left me feeling, that I hadn't been provided with anything very interesting or useful. I'm not sure that's a helpful comparison to make, because people may not have read either of these. On the fiction front, I'm busy with a very interesting, unusual book called On the Calculation of Volume by a Danish writer whose name is now going to escape me completely, but it's been a recent publishing sensation, and the premise involves a woman who is reliving the same day of her life over and over and over. Not in a Groundhog Day sense, but in a way that allows this author to thematically explore what a personal sense of time is, and how it both connects and disconnects us from the people around us who have perhaps an entirely different sense of time and how they occupy it. That's the best way I can put it. Anyway, I'm only one volume in, and there's 7 of them, I think, so I have a long way to go.
I'd written it down as a recommendation to myself because I love time-based stories. 7 volumes, I'm crossing it out. Not going to go there.
They're not doorstops, though. They're quite slender, so treat it as one big book.
Well, Damon, we hope that this demon that you are mud wrestling with on the page, will find its way onto our bookshelves soon. We're very much looking forward to that. And in the meantime, we are deeply appreciative of your time and of the insights that you've given us today. Thank you so much. We loved it.
Thank you both. It's great to have a conversation that actually delves in a challenging way into the writing process. So thank you for the thoughtful questions and, the stimulating conversation.
Thank you so much, Damon.
Gail, we've had a lot of big names on our podcast this season, but this one was probably the one I was most nervous for. I was really nervous going into this and was immediately set at my ease by Damon's manner and friendliness, and also by how relatable so many of his struggles as an author are, and how he's going through a lot of the same stuff that we all are.
In fact, I would say more than most of us. He is a man steeped in the struggle and self-doubt of writing, rather than the arrogance of I'm a big name and I will write beautiful books and the rest of you just sit down and listen to me. Like he is fascinatingly at war with writing.
Yes.
It fascinated me how almost joyless the process is for him, whereas often when we speak to people, we're reminded of the joy of writing. Today we're reminded that it's okay if writing's a struggle for you.
Yes, and that we can find joy in different parts of it. That what excites one person might not excite another.
What did you take in particular?
What he said about how writing a novel is solving a series of problems. And they start off very broad and big, like, what is the theme of this? Why am I interested in this theme? What is the voice that I'm going to use to tell this story? Then down to the characters, then the thing that at the moment interests him least, which is plot. And then down to the minutiae of sentence construction, should there be a comma here? Is this the right word to use there? And it seems as though that is the part that gives him the most joy, when you're just putting the finishing touches on, tying it all up in a lovely bow, and you no longer have terrible doubts about it. That for him is the most fun part, which was also very interesting to me.
Fascinating. So fascinating, because as I said to him, most people, that first bit's the joy. When you haven't hit the darts yet. It was so interesting.
What about you, Gail?
I was very interested. So I did, in asking the question, I love Roald Dahl's short stories myself. I am particularly obsessed with one that is about a man who gets stuck in a lift and is left to die there. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't read Roald Dahl's adult short stories, I'm going to pause to tell listeners this. You must. Yes. They are not children's stories. Like Damon said, they are dark stories, and they are fascinating. And he said that what inspired him about it was that they upset and startle people. And it gave him this permission that writing doesn't have to comfort people. It can startle people. And I had almost one of those moments of epiphany of that's something that I started out my writing loving, and that I think all my best work is about startling people with a twist in the book. And that maybe that's what I've been missing in my ideas recently, that my recent ideas have not been about startling people, because my brain's gone off down other types of paths. There's nothing startling in a rom-com. And maybe I need to reread Roald Dahl. Maybe that's what I need to do. So I was very interested in that.
Fascinating. So if any of our listeners have read the works of Damon Galgut, particularly his Booker Prize winner, The Promise, if you have thoughts about what we have all talked about today on this episode, please get in touch with us. We're on all social media across the board, and we'd love to hear from you.
You've been listening to another production from Solid Gold Podcasts.